Mr. President, today I want to introduce you to Natalia, who I met just last week. Natalia arrived in Canada from Ukraine more than 10 years ago. Give us a wave, Natalia. She arrived in Canada from Ukraine more than 10 years ago. She's safe here with her family, but she still has a lot of loved ones in Ukraine. Every time she hangs up after speaking with a cousin or a friend, she feels a twinge in her heart, wondering if this conversation might be their last. Mr. President, we cannot and will not let Natalia's loved ones down. The Ukrainian people are counting on us. We must stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine with as much as it takes, as long as it takes. But I bring up Natalia now, not just because of what's happening over in Ukraine as we speak, but also because she's key to what we're building here today and tomorrow.
You know, I met Natalia in Nova Scotia last week. She currently lives near Bridgewater, which is a small town of some 9,000 people. For over 50 years, the Michelin tire plant in Bridgewater has been one of the most high-performing facilities in the world. It is thanks to the strength of the workers there that Michelin has just announced major investments to modernize its facilities in order to respond to the growing demand for electric vehicles. Good, stable jobs like the ones at that plant truly count for Natalia and her family, and they also count for our large and small communities.
Scotia meeting with Natalia and others, I met third-generation tire workers at that Michelin plant. And because of the work that we're doing together and investments we're making for the future, that community will have jobs for generations more to come. And that doesn't just impact them in Bridgewater. It means there will continue to be vans delivering food to grocery stores in California and trucks delivering medical supplies to hospitals in Pennsylvania that roll on tires made in Nova Scotia, as it should be.
I'm Amanda Fancy. I'm the dealer-owner of Gals Home Hardware and Furniture. We've been at this location for about a year. We started in 1848, way back when. This is our 5th location, so you know, we've never have left the town limits. So when we're looking to build this location, you know, we had lots of opportunity to potentially look at you know, outside of the town limits, but it was really key for us to be and continue to be a growing business in Bridgewater. Bridgewater, Nova Scotia is unique. We have a beautiful countryside. Our town is 7,500 people, but then, you know, our customer reach is about 45,000. So, you know, we're talking about lots of small communities, you know, hidden treasures. There's huge opportunity here, and I think that it's certainly worthwhile to make the visit, make the call, do some inquiring, because it certainly is somewhere where I think there would be some strong investment opportunities for sure.
My name is Joey Richard. I come from Quebec, Montreal. I've studied opera at the Montreal Conservatoire of Music, so this is where I've learned about Italian, the language, and the food. And my passion just became bigger and bigger for food. I've been cooking for 20 years, almost. I opened a family business, but the only thing I forgot is that my family is still in Montreal, so I'm like, I'm trying. I make new friends. I'm building this thing, but it is a family business here. My chef is like my brother. His wife is like my sister. So I recreated a family environment. We do the real recipes, starting from the real ingredients, and for Italian food, what the secret is. Few ingredients and very fresh. So each recipe would be like 3-4 ingredients maximum. But it's just the best ingredients and makes it so delicious. If you think that it's impossible to have your own business, I'm the living proof that it is possible. People want us to thrive. We work together. So everybody helps each other. If you want to be part of a community, it is the community to be part of.
All right, good evening, everyone. I will call this special council meeting of Bridgewater Town Council to order. Just acknowledge that the land that we sit in is Mi'kma'ki, which is the unceded ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and we are privileged to be here. This is a one-topic agenda, so we have our budget deliberations, and so we'll continue on as we have for the last few weeks. And I'll turn that over to staff, and we'll get right to it.
Okay, so tonight we were going to give you an update with respects to the changes that were made based on the discussion at last week's meeting, as well as a little bit of information on sewer rates. You'd asked for some options there, and Kim's also provided a forecast in terms of the long-range operational and reserve allocations for sewer based on the rates that are being proposed in terms of increases. And we also have included in the agenda, and it's been included with the previous agendas as well, is the survey. So I thought perhaps Patrick could give council a quick summary of the budget survey. You've had it as background, but highlighting some of the main points would be useful for council as well. So first, to kind of start with what we discussed at our last meeting, there were some changes that council had asked that we make to the budget and bring forth to you what that would look like in terms of the 10-year plan, in terms of the operating budget. So you'd asked for the $50,000 for the winter route review to be removed. Police equipment that's in the capital budget, it was proposed that rather than fund that from operating, we fund that from reserve. There's $15,000 that was proposed to be added for grants to organizations, and that was asked to be removed. So that was a total savings of $150,000 for the fiscal year 23-24. Now, of that 150, only $15,000 would reoccur in future years, and that would be the $15,000 for grants. The rest were one time. So it really has an impact in 23-24, but the other years it doesn't. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that the original model had, based on, without the cuts that were discussed at the last meeting, you can see what the tax rate scenarios were. Looking at a 20% sewer rate increase and a 5-cent tax rate, you're in a deficit. Status quo, you're definitely in a deficit. And then 8 cents, you can see where that landed, as well as 10 cents. So when we made the cuts, you can see that it had a little bit of an impact in the 23-24 fiscal year, obviously based on the amount that was cut out of operating. But in the future years, the impact was minimal. So you can see that status quo, there's still a deficit of $448,000 if there's no tax rate change. And that is with a 20% sewer rate increase. With 5 cents, the deficit becomes a bit smaller at $29,000 for this year. And then with 8 cents, you can see that there's a surplus, as well as 10 cents. And this 10-year operating model was provided to council, and as discussed at the meeting last week, there are a number of variables in this model that can influence how it looks next year. So there's an assumption about assessment growth, assumption about CPI, interest rates. There's a number of assumptions that are built into this model. I'd say we're probably conservative in our assumptions, and that it, as I say, can change. This year it changed from the way it looked last year simply because of CPI and those increases there. So that's what the updated model looks like. And as we discussed, looking at the 10-year operating model kind of gives you an idea. If you're looking at tax rate stabilization, what are some options to do that? Of course, there's always the option to just look at it on a year-by-year basis. If there are surpluses, those are earmarked for reserve to help fund future capital. And as you saw with your 10-year capital budget, there is no shortage of capital funding requirements coming up, and even in this year, to fund the capital that we have. So having a little bit of a surplus can help also fund those reserves and then fund future capital as well. Or they can be used to level out some of those deficits that you see in future years as well. In terms of the wastewater rate transition plan, so we had a discussion with respects to our wastewater or sewer rates, and what some of the options were. There was some comment at the last meeting, and when we looked at the rates, about the residential units and having the additional residential unit be more equal to the primary residential unit, and to bring that fairness or equity to it. And we did discuss with council that we had a study done back in 2018, 2019 that looked at our sewer rates and how we can move it to a user pay model. And it was based on using metered flow. So water in equals water out. And that we were working towards that. There is a chart we'll show you in a moment that shows what those rates would be if we just flicked the switch and went right to 100% based on consumption. What the rates would look like, but there are some things that need to be worked out with that particular method of charging, and it's not as simple as just flicking that switch. So Kim, maybe you can kind of go over some of the road, I don't want to say roadblocks, but things that have to be overcome in order for us to move to that model. But in the meantime, we'll continue to look at the rate and move it closer to what those rates should be based on that 2019 study.
Sure. So looking at that study and then having kind of a staff group that have been working towards the implementation of how do we get to a consumption-based billing for sewer, there were a few things that we came up against, and some of those are the current accounting software we use has limitations related to both using the same water meter reading for two different utilities. So if there was a sewer utility and a water utility, of course the software is built not to import the same thing twice, and then we'd be forcing it to import the same thing twice. In addition to that, our sewer billing shows up on our tax bills, not on our water bill, because the water is a separate legal entity. And so we would then be trying to use that consumption on a tax bill. So it's a whole other, it's different than the water billing system, and everything's already there with the utility code. So that gets more complicated. And then there are instances where a building may be on a piece of land, and the land is owned by one owner and the building by another. And property taxes could be assessed to the building, but the sewer is actually attached to the land. And so we have a discrepancy in that also the water would be attached to the building. The water meter reading is attached to the building, and that's one owner, and would be trying to use that reading for a different owner to charge them for sewer. So there's, like, it may seem like small things, but it's just like when we add them all up, it's things that staff have to take some time to work through. We also have some customers that are on water and not sewer, or sewer and not water. Not a lot, but we do have some. And then we did note, and I think even in the study that was done, that there's definitely water customers that we have that if we just use their water consumption as the calculation of what they're inputting back into the system for wastewater, they might actually use that water in production. It may flow in, but it may not flow out. And so they could be, while we're trying to get to a user pay, that one might not be effective. So there's some things like that, but also noting that that study was never, or had never suggested that we go to 100% consumption-based billing, because then you have a lot of ups and downs based on water consumption. So there was a base charge based on meter size, and a component of consumption combined. And so that's helpful, but there are instances where there are oversized meters on properties. So generally, residential has a 5/8 meter, and so the base charge for that plus the consumption rate in the model that they've suggested would work. But there are instances where residential could have a 2-inch meter for a reason I'm not sure of. They may have oversized planning on something, and the model suggests a much higher base charge for that size meter. So then all of a sudden you could have some potential residential customers overpaying based on the size of the meter, not related to the flow of the water consumption. So there's a lot of variables that if we want to get to a user pay, we have to resolve prior to that. So just gives you an idea of, there's a handful that fall under each of these, but all of a sudden, when we're trying to get at solving a problem, we're potentially creating others if we don't work through the issues and get them resolved before implementing a consumption-based sewer billing.
So those are the rates, as you see on the screen, that model had suggested with 100% changeover. So you can see that residential, the new rate would be $519, and I believe that's close to what was being recommended, if not what was being recommended. And then you go down, one of the ones that we had questions about, or council did, was hospitals and what that would be. And you can see that had an existing rate of $4,250, and based on consumption, it should be more along the lines of $72,000. So there were some significant increases in there, which is partially why they had suggested a phase-in as opposed to just a 100% jump, because some would see some bills, schools, for example, hotels, major industry would all see significant increases in their rates based on consumption. And so that's just there to give you an idea of what it would look like if we were at that 100% changeover that they had suggested. And again, we were transitioning to that model. So what was being recommended in the budget was to increase the sewer rate a certain percentage each year to kind of get to what those levels would be, or those amounts would be. And there's a slide that we'll show you in a little bit that shows what that would look like over the next several years. And with the model, the rate funds your operating expenses for sewer or wastewater, and it also covers your principal and interest cost and provides for some reserves. And those reserves, based on our capital plan, they won't fully fund your capital requirements as reserves and the amount that are going in, but it will help offset the amount that you have to borrow and thus offset your debt cost, your principal and interest cost. So there's the 10-year model that Kim has prepared. Maybe Kim, you just want to run over that?
Sure. So much like we have the 10-year model for the town, I actually went through a process to really be able to look at where the sewer rate needs to go in the long term, as opposed to just looking at it year over year as we had been. And so taking the individual rates and putting that aside, but looking at where we need the revenue to be based on our future operating expenses, as well as debt service ratio, as a lot of our upcoming debt over the next 10 years does relate to wastewater. This gives you an idea. So even though we're recommending an overall 20% increase for this year, we would be suggesting the following 2 years would be at 20%, and then 3 more years at 15, and 1 more year at 10%, to get the sewer revenue to where it needs to be. So for example, in 23-24, if you look at the debt service, which is the 5th column over the second last, $167,703, that's the principal and interest payments related to sewer on the debt now. If we look out to the final year, 32-33, we're at just under $2.8 million in debt service costs related to wastewater. And so we've talked about the fact that we have significant wastewater infrastructure in a 10-year plan, and we need to actually get that sewer rate to cover both operating expenses as well as repaying the debt on those infrastructure projects. And so I guess the 20%, even though technically it allows us to put some in reserve, we don't need it just to cover operating expenses. We need it to save for future capital replacement, for emergency situations, and so on. So you'll see that, even this year, we're showing about a $700,000 transfer to operating reserve out of that total sewer revenue of $2.5 million. And the long-term model that we have, by 28-29, we're putting at least $1 million aside for capital, because even with the sewer infrastructure we have in the 10-year plan, we know there'll be either the need to fund it with the operating monies or to put it aside for future replacements. So that's kind of it's kind of showing you a lot of things, but the main thing to note is that we do need that, irregardless of the individual rates that we set for this budget in the long term. The sewer, in order to cover all its expenses, the rates do need to increase significantly over time.
So that basically covers this here. So council, as you deliberate what you wish to have for a sewer rate, if you choose, as noted here, to increase any of the individual rates without adjusting others, it means more money will be placed into reserve to help. So that number that you saw back here would increase if you didn't. So if you increase one of the units, let's say the additional unit, and not adjust any of the others, what that'll mean is that there'll be more money placed in reserve. So when you're looking at your rates, keep that in mind. So the proposal by staff was to just have a starting point and then increase it every year until we got to where we need it to be, as opposed to all at once. And of course, council can always decide on a different implementation timeline. Staff are going to bring back to council a proposal this fiscal year in terms of how we can do that over a period of time. For this year, it was to understand that it was 20%, and then we would see that 20% or an increase the following year, and a couple years after that, every year you'd see an increase in that rate until you got to where you want it to be. But you can accelerate that if you feel the need to do so. So these are.
I'm sorry, Andrew.
Sorry, just out of curiosity, Taylor,
Yeah.
the chart. So between now and that 7-year sort of period, does that include new wastewater services going into the ground
That's our capital plan.
as part of your?
Yeah,
capital
so that's
plan?
so that would include your financing or your debt service costs for borrowing to do that
Okay.
capital.
Okay.
Yeah. And you can use sewer reserves to offset some of that, but the amount of capital that we need to do for wastewater, you're still gonna do the borrowing.
Sorry, maybe I should reformat the question, like, stuff going in at exit 12A, as an
Oh.
example. between now and 7 years? Probably not, I assume.
No,
No, I don't think.
anything going in at 12A is just part of that
Project.
business servicing costs. It's not specifically separated out here.
Yeah,
So I
it's
guess-
part
so
of
my-
a different number and a different part of our budget, yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
my question might be then, let's say 24, 25, we start putting in sewers or wastewater services at exit 12A.
Mhm.
That's gonna increase your debt servicing expenses
Yeah.
there, and we still have perhaps 5 years of subsidized wastewater rates.
But
Does that make
you,
sense?
you mean before we get to full cost recovery?
Before you get to full cost recovery?
Yeah.
Which could.
Yes, that's
okay,
right.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Councilor Brown.
In addition to that, we'll be bringing on potentially more users that will be heavily subsidized because they'll fall into a lot of those categories. Would that be fair to
I think what
assume?
we're seeing in that chart is based on that, it'd be closer to 2030 before it'd be 100% cost recovery. So until you get to that point, the rates would be subsidized. Well, when I say subsidized, your operating revenue and expenses are being covered. It's really your reserve funding and your debt servicing piece of it. So that's where you need those rates to be to cover that. So you can see sewer reserve transfer is really your surplus from the rate, right? So it's fully funded for your operating cost. And your operating cost includes your debt servicing cost, your principal and your interest. So I wouldn't, the sewer rate's not being subsidized in that regard by the general rate, because you're paying that and the rest is going in reserve.
Councilor Thorburn. Just a quick question, Tammy. Do you know what we had in reserves for the 22, 23?
How much is in your sewer?
Reserve?
Yeah,
And-
there's,
Whatever is in reserve is after the expenses have been paid. Is that correct? Yeah.
yep,
Yeah.
you're,
Because when we first started this, some around the table knew that we wasn't even making enough to pay the operating costs. So we've come a long way in a fairly reasonable time.
yeah. Now, having said that, there are some things in the operating budget that aren't allocated under wastewater. So
Okay.
if we had treated it like, and Kim and I were talking about this today, if it were like the water utility, right? The water utility, we allocate 30% of certain positions' salary to the utility, like mine, Kim's, engineering. We don't do that with sewer. So we don't, it's not like true 100% cost of the town's operating. My salary is not allocated to the sewer rate, it's just general. Same with Kim. So we may get to that point that we've got it out as a separate cost center, 100% with wages and overhead and all that allocated there, but right now it's part of the general operations.
Could that be operated the same way as a public service
Yeah.
commission?
It's something that council can explore, like Halifax has Halifax Water, which has water and sewer.
Okay.
I know that there's other municipal units that have questioned whether or not it would make sense to move to a utility that's regulated by the UARB. There's benefits to it. The debt's one piece where that would belong with the utility as opposed to the town. The debt would still have to be paid, but it's just, it wouldn't be factored into our debt service ratio.
But everything would be controlled by the URB based on the
You
business case.
Yes, you'd have to
Same
go
as your
through that.
water.
Yep.
You just don't put your rates up because you think it's a good thing to do.
Yes, it provides that level of assurance too, to those paying
And
the rate.
accountability.
Yeah, that it has been scrutinized by that public entity
Yep.
that ensures that the rate represents the true cost, and it's not like a profit center for the town, yeah.
Okay, great, thanks.
Do you have the reserve amount there, Kim?
Yes, so we're projecting at the, I guess as of last Friday, we'd have just under $1.5 million in the wastewater reserve. But we're expecting to put a little more in than we take out next year. So this budget, it's on page 13 of the budget document. We're projecting to have $1.7 million in that wastewater reserve at the end of March of 2024.
How much did we transfer into the reserve in 22, 23?
Well, the year end's not done yet, so I can't answer that specifically, but
Okay.
we're projecting about 500,000.
Okay, no, we just wanna get some
Mostly
comparison.
because, yeah, we haven't a lot of the projects are multi-year, so even though we anticipated we may have start paying back debt sooner, until those projects are financed, we haven't had to start making those principal payments.
Great, that answers my question.
Councilor Caldwell. Do these, I assume these rates over 7 years will include bringing up institutions to the level that was recommended in the report?
We will come forward during this fiscal year with a proposal as to how we hope to address some of the inconsistencies in the rates. And so those rates are historically just have been. And so staff will make some recommendations as to maybe what different categories we need or how we might better approach some of the categories to get to a better user pay through a flat rate until we can get to a consumption-based model. And so some of that might be, we'll talk about the multiple unit rates, but we can also talk about just the 4 categories that the sewer bylaw permits us to have rates for.
These are the options that, and again, it's, at the end of the day, council will decide exactly what level or amount you're comfortable with, but the option A was, as, I believe it was option A that was proposed in the budget. So that there, the additional residential sewer was $297, whereas the first unit was 518. So there was some, and same with commercial, they were off a bit. There was some discussion about the residential sewer, and the comments around that were that there's the same amount of demand on the system in terms of wastewater generated and having to be handled through our system, and comments about wanting to see that more equal in terms of amounts. So Kim has provided you with a scenario that looks at option B moves the additional residential sewer per unit up a bit closer and brings down the primary one a little bit. And then option C, you keep the primary at 518, and then the additional, you move up even higher. And as you can see, what it does is it increases your revenue, which will then, the surplus would go into the reserve to help fund the future capital.
Okay.
So that's the rates. I believe that was, yeah, the rate options. I was also going to propose that we have Patrick give you a highlight of the budget survey. I don't know if you want that now or after you.
Well, we're kind of on the sewer topic, and we didn't really land on a consistent spot last week. So why don't we, before we go into the survey, why don't we see if we have more questions on the sewer rate or any comments? It's been a week since we last discussed this. I don't know if there's any. Councilor Thorburn.
I like option A. I think it's fair, reasonable, in a time where costs are going up. And the people most affected can least afford the big increases. So I think keeping gradual year over year will help do that, because at the end of the day, the tenants will be the ones paying the sewer rate, not the landlords. The same thing with the taxes, and we're getting them on the taxes pretty heavy this year too. So that's where I'm at.
Councilor Caldwell.
At last meeting, I was at option A, and I haven't changed yet. But I would like to say that, so phasing this in over 7 years, I would not be opposed to compressing that timeline a bit, 5 years or something, if council were amenable to that. Because it's been a few years already, and it's a long time to phase those in.
Other comments, Councilor?
I'm still with option A at this time. Again, echoing Councillor Thorburns' comments of, being mindful of increases to potential tax rate, just trying to keep things affordable and in line with everything else. So still with option A.
Councillor McDonald?
I'm at option C. I think that's where I was last time too. It has to keep increasing, and we have to shorten that timeline. I think, 7 more years is too long, and we know it will go further than that because there are going to be other projects that kind of add to that burden. And and I think 7 years to kind of spread it out to where it is now fair is a long time for those who are kind of carrying that burden to wait.
Councillor Taylor?
Option C as well, the percentage, it looks like a huge percentage, but it's $150. Those that are paying rent currently have a capped rent unless they're in a fixed term lease, which is highly unlikely. So it'll be the landlord or the owner of the property that will pick up that difference on the second property. Who pays the actual tax burden for the hospital? Is it the province directly?
Yeah, we get
Yeah.
a separate.
So, I struggle a bit with that. I mean, the state of our healthcare in Nova Scotia is not great, but I think anytime we go to the province and negotiate, we tend to get a lot of pushback. And so maybe it's time for the town to push back a little bit more. 375% looks scary as a percentage, but $5,000 is really nothing in the pocket of the province, but that's just me. Considering the number you showed us earlier,
Yeah.
where it should be,
The
it's like
72,000.
huge gap.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, I'd like to see that one move. I was over here last week, and I've kind of moved, it's amazing what a week will do. Sometimes I get in my own head. So I see both sides, because you've got the secondary unit, so we're all kind of in the same place for the residential sewer rate, so just that 6% increase for the primary. And I understand the secondary units are rental units, and so there's tenants in there. But what kind of clicked for me is, so if you move to the 450, it's already being subsidized because it's not at the rate of the primary, so they're already paying less than the primary. But also, if we have large projects which we're borrowing for, if we have more in reserves, then we can borrow less, which means our debt servicing costs are less, which means there's less of that cost again being subsidized. Because what's happening is it's not just the sewer rate that we have to pay, as whether you're the primary or the secondary. When we borrow money, we have to pay that back, and the less money we have in reserves, the more money we have to borrow. And so those costs get passed on anyway. So I'm not sure if I'm at option C, but I'm certainly, I'm maybe partway, just looking to accelerate the secondary units. And I definitely want to see that. I know staff are gonna bring this back in the next fiscal year with the hospital and the school, but I think they're very much under contributing to these costs. But at the end of the day, I think we need to ramp up the money we're putting into reserves so that we are borrowing less, because we can see by every chart that we have, we are going to be over our debt service ratio limit very quickly. And so, we can only raise taxes so much, and we're looking at a tax rate increase this year, which is not fun. But again, the people that are the community's not equally burdened by this. I don't know how else to kind of phrase it. So there is still a discrepancy here. So whether it's 450 or 400, I do now, I've moved to finding a different number than that 297, just because I think that gap between the, half the community essentially is paying more than the other half of the community. So I don't, I'm trying to find that sweet spot where it's recognizing the two issues that we face. So that's probably less helpful because I don't have a number, because it's not necessarily at that 450, but it's somewhere in between there. And I don't know if there's a compromise or not, because at the end of the day we're going to vote and it's going to be what it is. But I'm just trying to figure out how to borrow less.
So just to give you a little bit more information, if you put that second unit rate at $400, that would give you an extra $255,000 over option A.
Okay. Yeah, we could circle back to this. I don't know if anyone has any other thoughts or comments.
Well, option B really doesn't change really anything. You're dropping your principal one by $30 and you're increasing the other one by 31, so you're talking $1. So that option to me is, it's a moot point.
Yeah, option B was designed to not impact the primary
Right.
and to make that up with the secondary unit.
Right.
Yeah,
So it really doesn't accomplish anything.
no. Yeah, I agree. That one's kind of out for me. Unless you did option,
You can keep the primary.
keep the
same.
primary at the proposed 518 and moved the secondary to that 328. And then we can, I'm hearing a few people talk about taking that 7-year timeline and shrinking that down, but we don't have to have, that conversation we can have as we discuss the other components to the wastewater, but.
So that'd be about 78,000. Yeah.
That way, when you increase the 297 to, I think it's 328.
328, yeah.
Well, yeah, and the existing rate right now, I believe, is 180.
185.
185, yeah. For the additional.
Right, so moving that to 328, basically with the rest of option A,
Yeah.
it achieves about $77,000 extra.
It's not a lot, but it's.
I could live with that, but I would go no farther.
Yes, Councillor.
I could live with that. That's a compromise that would help get a consensus around the table.
Councillor Bashir's not in here. I don't know if this side's, no. Okay. All right, well, we can, I don't know if anyone has any other thoughts.
That's it.
It is what it is.
It is
We'll,
what it is.
Okay, let's move on to the survey and then we'll talk about other items in the budget.
All right, so as council is aware, we did a 5-week community budget online survey in February and March. We had a total of 97 respondents to that survey this year. Just to give council some context, that's up pretty significantly over last year when we only had 66. And to be perfectly candid, we've had other years when the response has been in single digits. So to have almost 100 respondents this year was really good. About 80% of those respondents self-identified as Town of Bridgewater residents. And just for the public's knowledge, we do keep this open. So yes, you can do it if you're a Town of Bridgewater resident, but we also recognize that we may have business owners who live in the county but do business here in Bridgewater. And we are a service area for 60,000 people within about a half-hour drive. So having input of the folks who seek services and shop and spend time here in Bridgewater is important as well. One of the questions we asked of our respondents was to rate the overall quality of life in Bridgewater in their opinion on a scale of 0 to 100. The average score across our respondents for that was 72 out of 100. We also asked whether or not our respondents felt that quality of life had changed in the town of Bridgewater over the past 5 years. A total of 88% of respondents said that quality of life has either stayed the same or improved, and just 12% expressed that they felt quality of life had worsened in town in the past 5 years. In terms of things that would improve quality of life, 65% of respondents said that better roads and sidewalks would top that list. 49% said enhanced trails and parks. 43% said more public events. 41% said more recreation programming. And then there are, if you go through the complete survey response, about another half dozen things on that list that we go further down with smaller percentiles. In terms of capital priorities, the public survey indicated that our residents are very much in line with what council has identified as priorities. So roads, streets, and sidewalk upgrades is definitely at the top of that list. Wastewater and water infrastructure improvements, as well as Phase 2 of the King Street infrastructure project that also scored as a medium to high priority for our respondents as well. On the operating side of things, again, priorities seem to be very similar to what council is looking at. Winter time street and sidewalk maintenance identified as a high priority, so too did policing, so did growing and marketing the town, as did residential and commercial development, and far and away the most popular operating initiative that the community was interested in is physician and newcomer recruitment. We asked our survey participants to provide us some information in terms of if council decides to increase service levels, how council should go about covering the cost of that. The majority believe that a combination of increased fees and taxes plus borrowing for capital projects is the way to accomplish that. We also asked our community to give us their feedback on our current tax rate, in particular the residential rate of $175 per 100 of assessed value. From our respondents, 45% believe that taxes are too high, 18% are unsure, and 37% believe that the rate is fair or, in some cases, too low. Finally, we also left a comment section, so we opened it up for folks to submit written responses. We received 41 in total, which again is a great number. I'm not going to go through each of those, but those unedited responses were included with the summary of the budget survey engagement process, which was included in the budget council package that you've had for a few weeks now. If anyone's interested in terms of the public of getting into what's in that package, it is available online at bridgewater.ca/agenda. Just click into the date for tonight's meeting and it's there as part of the package.
Any questions on the survey or anything from Patrick?
Just a comment that it was great information, and I thank the public for getting involved because we do read it and it is very valuable information and feedback.
Yep, that was great. Any other comments on that? Do you have other sections to go
No.
through? No? Are there any items? We also have to discuss tax rate maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
So
That's
because we were also, haven't really given clear idea of where we wanted to go. I think we had 3 at 8 cents and 4 at 10 cents. So I don't know if there's any other comments or questions on that. Councillor Thorburn?
It's got really nothing to do with either or. Impartial question, I guess. How much longer have we got on that special purpose tax? And it's probably 6 or 7 years. We keep looking at it every year. We're hoping we'll get done so that will give us, or the regular tax break.
Yeah, because that'll take 6 cents right off the
Well,
their burden.
I think it was 8 cents when I first come on council.
It was, yeah.
I was ready for that question the first night. I don't have it open tonight in front of me, but we have a ways to go.
Oh, yeah.
But I did mention, when we were going through the budget this year, that we're actually, the 6 cents is bringing in more than what the debt payment is this year.
Right.
So we're going to now actually be able to start putting money away to take off from that final year. It hadn't really changed much, but with assessment growth, we're getting more for our 6 cents. And so that will help lower the years, but it really hasn't moved, and it's quite, I don't know if it was in the slides. I'll open it and let you know, but
It's no big
I
deal.
was already,
I had it down last month, but didn't get changed.
65,000 more this year than what's required.
yeah, exactly.
How much more?
65,000 more.
But then that would be annual if the assessment
Yeah.
doesn't change.
Right.
Then, so that helps take away from that final year.
Right, so we have enough reserves to match a year, then we've just essentially shaved a year off. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's a number we should always remember, like
8 years, maybe?
something like that. But I think it's always you ask that question, and we all want to know the answer, so it's just.
And I'm always ready, except for tonight.
We're always optimistic that it's less than we think.
Yeah, yeah. I know from time to time I get the question, how come we still have this burden in town? And I have to remind folks that the town, essentially the town alone paid for the library. So that additional component to the facility is the town carried that burden by itself. So while the facility is jointly owned by the municipality district of Lunenburg and the town of Bridgewater, MODL did not contribute to the library. Worth noting too that the town also pays the lease for the library in the facility and pays that lease on its own. I will say over 66% of users of the library are from outside town. So
I don't know why that would be
it is
changed.
something I think we all struggle with, why one municipality is paying a cost that is shared across multiple municipalities, but for future discussions. But again, I'm sure you all get that same question, how come we still have this? And a lot of that has to do with the fact that that not insignificant section of that building was paid for by the town of Bridgewater. So, are there any other items in the budget too that we have members of staff, we have engineering and community development here, and of course finance. Are there any other items? I know we've gone through these over the last couple of weeks. Councillor Thorburn?
Just one, this Pearl Street, I think we decided not to do it this year, budget.
I think at the last meeting, the question was asked with respects to whether or not we had the resources to do it, and our Director of Engineering indicated that we'd be contracting out that work. So it wouldn't impact our ability to do the rest of our pavement management. So the last part of the discussion was just to leave it in as it is now. Yeah.
Because I'm just wondering if the work will be done.
Yeah, because we're contracting it out and
Yeah,
not
right.
using our resources. It wasn't going to conflict with our ability to do other pavement management projects. So
So you're quite sure it will get done in the 23-24 year.
if it's in the
And
budget,
road work will be all done.
unless we can't get contractors to do the work,
Okay, no,
Yeah. which could happen.
okay, no, I'm happy with it. Because we promised them that we would do it when it was ready.
Yeah.
Other questions or comments? Any other thoughts on the rate itself, tax rate itself?
10 cents.
Since, well, I don't see anyone's changed their, this is gonna be an interesting budget. We're usually very, very much aligned, and we've got, next week our goal is to, if we can, is to pass the budget, and a budget will pass, so that's not the issue. It's just want to make sure everyone has a chance to ask their questions, or if they have any suggestions. Before we wrap this meeting up, I want to make sure everyone's had that opportunity. Can I go in once? Go in twice? Okay. Did you have anything final?
No,
to
I
add?
think it's based on the conversations we had, we're really down to those last two issues of where council wishes to go with the tax rate and where you wish to go with the sewer rate.
Okay. Councilor McDonald.
So just because we've never been at this point before, what happens? What happens from here in next meeting?
So in order to finalize the budget document, the tax rates are a critical component because it determines the revenue number that we put in the budget. So until council sets that, the final document can't be produced. If you're not comfortable making that decision tonight, you can always make that decision at the next meeting and approve the budget as with that rate and that revenue amount proposed, and then we would have the final document a little later. But that's really what's necessary. It's kind of one of the primary things you do is set that rate to approve the budget.
So my thought, and correct me if I'm wrong, was that we'd have, you'd have your budget motion like we normally do, and someone's gonna make a motion, and someone's gonna say, at a tax rate of $1.85, or they're gonna say $1.83, and then they're gonna have the sewer rate of this and that, and either that number passes, or it doesn't pass, or, like, we'll have a debate on that.
Yeah.
Just because we haven't landed on what it will be for sure. Like, yeah, normally we're like, okay, this is what it's gonna be, and it's all kind of prepared.
So we'll have to have, because the budget document will have how much goes into reserve and those types of things, which that rate affects that piece of it.
So if I can make a suggestion, that we have kind of, we've landed on two different spaces, really, so we don't have multiples. I think we have the option A with 328 as the additional for the sewer, and 10 cents. So that's one. So you could probably have one
Yeah.
like that. And then I think over here we have the option C. And I think Councillor Conklin not here, but I think it was 8 cents was from the three here, 8 or 9. Was it 8?
I think so, yeah.
8? So at least to give staff, like it's likely going to be one or the other. So if that helps you prepare some numbers. And then we're gonna end up compromising and being in the, I don't know. But at least we're not going in kind of blind. Because you're right, you have to prepare some, how much is gonna go in reserves and
Yeah,
stuff like that.
yeah, because your budget document will set all that out, yeah. So we will have to come up with the budget summary that, I don't know, Kim, if that's possible. We have two budgets basically, right? It's really
Normally-
just two numbers.
For next
Yeah.
week, you would have the that
Yeah.
would be, when you get that later this week, that would be the final. Because otherwise, you're not approving a final document with a total expense. Like
Yeah.
the motion, you would be approving a total expense for the year for operating and so on. So if it's gonna move,
It's almost like we have to have two budget documents prepared.
Yeah, and
That-
they're gonna be,
But that affect your total revenue, that affect your total expenses, so those numbers would be different. And then the amount of reserves would be, the amount going into reserve would be different as well, so.
and the motion also includes the sewer rates.
And,
Yeah, so at least you have just two numbers, so I think.
yeah, just, it's,
Narrow it down a bit.
It is a long week.
what's that?
It is all.
It's a, so that was 518 primary and 328 additional?
Yeah.
Option B modified,
Yeah,
okay. With the 10 cent,
yeah,
and then 8 cents in option C.
correct.
Well, what's the difference between 8 cents and 2, what's it, 60-some thousand for 1 cent?
This would be 120,000
It's right-
really,
right
120,000.
there.
because there's a 2 cent
I
difference. there.
find it strange they want to increase the sewer rate for about $450, but they want, in the tax rate up 2 cents. So, you know, there's a reason.
Yeah.
All right, any other comments?
I did want to update you
Yeah.
on the special purpose tax.
Oh, yes,
So fiscal year 27-28 would be the last year you would need to charge a full year of the 6 cents. And there would be enough in reserve, assuming assessment just stayed where it is for 23-24. You would have the next 2 years worth of payments, because the last payment is made in 29-30. And so by the end of 27-28, you would have 2 years worth of payments in reserve to continue making those payments. So 2 years has been knocked off that at this point.
okay.
So we've got 4 years to go.
Are you gonna do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And one other adjustment that we'll be making to the budget for next week is the province has provided to all municipalities in Nova Scotia some extra funding. And it is funding to help support housing. So it's to look at whether it's capacity, like studies, or infrastructure development, increasing your infrastructure's capacity to support housing in your community. So we got notified on Friday that there's $770,000 being provided to the town. In fact, it hit the town's bank account on Friday. And there's a cost sharing agreement that's very specific about what it has to be spent on. So it has to be related to support for housing in terms of infrastructure and studies about your infrastructure capacity and those types of things. So what we'll be doing is going through, we have no problem finding the capital project to do that with, because our wastewater is, of course, that's what that's all about, is not only meeting guidelines, but building that ability to handle development that we have, and that's being proposed. So we'll be going through the capital budget and looking at what projects we may be able to pluck this money in and pull out, whether it's borrowing we're going to do or operating reserve. We do have to have the project completed by March 31st, 2025. So we can't just put the money in reserve and let it sit there. We have to use it for a project that would help support housing. So we will make that adjustment in the capital budget, and at this point, we're suggesting that it would be either reducing borrowing or reducing the amount that you have to pull out of reserve to fund a project.
questions on that? All right, then, there's nothing else on our agenda, so I will ask for a motion to adjourn the special council meeting, and then we'll just stick around because we have a discussion session. So motion to adjourn, Deputy Mayor Vergier, seconded by Councilor McDonald. We are adjourned. Thank you.